Vice Chancellor, Principal Officers of Caleb University, colleagues, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I wish to thank you immensely for giving me the opportunity to join and present this keynote speech at this important conference. We are here at a very significant time for our country and for Africa. What we choose to make of the challenges and as well opportunities presented will be critical for the development of Africa and our dear country. Why is it important to have this debate on industrial and innovation capacity in the African and Nigerian context? I will advance at least 4 reasons for a resurgent debate on industrialization and innovation capacity. First, the recent COVID-19 pandemic shows that countries with weak domestic capacity to manufacture basic products are extremely vulnerable to not just economic shocks, they face real health and food securities. Second, the lessons of the last 50 years of Africa post-independence show clearly that these countries continue to lag far behind in technological capacity. They are poorly diversified in their technological production base and export basket. They experience disproportionately large volatility and huge swings in their fundamental economic variables. This is especially true for resource-dependent countries that are usually the most impacted by external shocks, such as the recent nexus of pandemic and the resulting global financial crisis. Third, African countries, despite implementing wide-ranging trade liberalization measures at different periods over the past few decades, did not realize the promised growth and development dividend. These countries remain at the bottom rung of the poverty ladder. In large part, the fundamental reason harks back to their inability to push their industrial and innovation capacity agenda to a logical end, and subsequently failure to diversify their economics. Finally, African countries are falling far behind their Asian comparators that continue to implement industrialization and innovation plans. For example, the early years of the 20th century were very challenging for the Asian continent. Extreme poverty was rife as countries struggled through wars. Decades later, these countries have completely transformed their economies and societies. The average Asian that in 1950 had almost half as much income as the average African was twice as rich by 2016. The income of the average Asian has risen up to 80% of the average global citizen. Meanwhile, Africa wallowed in poverty, with this average citizen worse off at only 40% of worldwide average. Innovation is a major source of modern productivity growth, and it constitutes a central process of economic advance in all countries. It is a social process shaped by institutional structures in which they are embedded. However, the focus of innovation policy, particularly in developing countries, is relatively a recent phenomenon. For decades, the role of science and technology in promoting development has centered on the supply side that took its inspiration from what we call the linear model of science, with its emphasis on the supply of scientists and engineers. In this conception of economic growth, innovation flows from basic science in a relatively smooth progression from the laboratory to the market. The reality is different, but this is not the subject of this speech. Innovation equally underpins the cumulative increases in workers' productivity driven mainly by technological advance, investment in physical capital, and the growth of human skills. However, institutions and policies shape these factors in very profound ways. There is little doubt that knowledge-based innovation in different forms, for example, human agents, codified information, new machinery and equipment, particularly with the advent of the internet, has been spreading at an unprecedented rate. But it is equally true that large swaths of the globe are being left behind, such as people in Africa. The spread of the internet across countries, as well as the adoption of related artifacts such as computers and the common telephone, gives you an idea of the indication of the skewed growth of human knowledge. Clearly, the innovation and industrial technological capacity of countries accounts for the uneven generation and diffusion of knowledge, and as well, the differential economic growth that we have witnessed over the last several decades. Put it differently, innovation is a factor that separates countries that made rapid progress in catching up and those that tend to be falling behind. There have, of course, been massive knowledge changes, creating increasing convergence of different areas of science and technology. For instance, in the biological sciences and biotechnologies knowledge base, there is a convergence of techniques and practices that encompass genomics, molecular biologies, agricultural and industrial biotechnology. Material sciences and technologies include advances in nanotechnology, smart materials, high-performance materials, and advanced catalyst materials. This scientific and technological convergence has brought about fruitful advancements complementarily to the different fields of science, but more important for developing countries. These technologies are being applied in traditional sectors in ways that could not be imagined a decade ago. Relatively technologically, backward countries have gained foothold in regulated and competitive markets and are realizing significant export revenues from traditional sectors such as fish, cut flower, and fruits. DNA techniques are being applied to convert oil palm, once known only as a consumption item, to produce biodiesel. Molasses from sugarcane is now used to produce ethanol and methanol, all of which have great potential to reduce reliance to replace petroleum-based fuels. These new and emergent distributed knowledge bases will translate new forms of industrial organization in developing countries, as well as new institutional arrangements. For instance, the fish farming sector, a notably low-tech activity, presently employs new materials, design concepts employed in satellite communications and sonar technologies, among others. Another area of significant change is the inclusion of advanced digital techniques in what used to be purely mechanical instruments. While scientific instruments may have become costly in certain respects, they provide opportunities for transforming traditional sectors in which developing countries have comparative advantage. The transformational power of Fourth Industrial Revolution, for example, is evident. They include, for example, increasing access to financial services for previously unbanked population in the villages, connecting entrepreneurs and businesses to other sectors of the economy, helping governments to migrate to online platforms for payments, thereby reducing slippages and increasing revenues, providing easy access to information on competitive pricing, crop monitoring information, disease prevention tips, and disaster mitigation support in the agriculture sector, providing mobile technology to improve medical data, service delivery, and disaster response, and boosting, finally, local content and local participation in extractive industries. New biological applications are also improving our response to global challenges, including climate change and pandemics. Global response to COVID-19 illustrates the great progress in biological sciences in just the past few years. The speed with which scientists sequenced the virus genome, it took weeks rather than months, exemplifies a new dawn of advances in how biology converges with digital technologies. In addition to the speed and scale of new virus sequencing, for example, developments in biological innovations are enabling the rapid introduction of clinical trials of vaccines, the search for effective therapies, and a deep investigation of both the origins and the transmission patterns of the virus. There are also promising solutions for the treatment of diseases such as sickle cell anemia, polygenic diseases such as cardiovascular disease, infectious diseases such as malaria. Studies predict that the annual global potential impact of this set of diseases will be around $0.5 trillion to $1.3 trillion over the next 10 to 20 years. Innovations will exert massive impact also on agriculture, aquaculture, and food. The applications in this sector will include innovative ways to conduct breeding of animals and plants using molecular or genetic markers that are many times quicker than established selective breeding methods, for example. There will be new, more precise tools for the genetic engineering of plants, fast developing work using microbiome of plants, soil, animals, and water to improve the quality and productivity of agricultural production. So then what do we know as disruptive innovation? Innovation is often confused with research and measured in terms of scientific or technological outputs. However, innovation is neither science, research, or technology. It is the application of those things, knowledge in the production and building further upon it. This knowledge is acquired through several means, for example, through learning, through research, or through experience. But until it is applied in the production of goods or services, it cannot be considered innovation. In contrast to invention, which refers mainly to novelty and is a key criterion, for example, for patenting, innovation is a much broader concept. It refers to the process by which firms master and implement the design, production of goods and services that are new to them, irrespective of whether these products and services are new to their competitors or to their countries, or in fact new to the world. So how do we define innovation? It is a carrying out of new combination. Schumpeter resolved this activity into 5 different types, for example, namely, the introduction of a new product, the introduction of a new method of production, or called process, the opening up of a new market, the opening up of a new source of supply, the carrying out of a new organization of an industry, like the creation or breach of monopoly position. Innovations, therefore, have several characteristics, which include uncertainty, interactive learning, and degree of innovativeness. So therefore, innovation could be minor, it could be major, it could be radical, it could be incremental, among others. We characterize them as follows. A radical innovation, for example, has global significance, like the internet, like the new digital technology, the 4IR. Second is small improvements in product design and quality in production processes or the ways in which production is organized. Changes to maintenance routines that collectively modify products and process to bring costs down, increase efficiency, enhance welfare, and ensure environmental sustainability. This is what we refer to as incremental innovation, and is carried on a daily basis in firms. The third is changes to management and marketing brought about by new technologies. This belongs to the category of institutional and organizational innovation. But what brought us here today is that we all know that Africa's industrial and innovation capacity is extremely weak. The technological innovation capability of a country is a function of several factors, such as capabilities of the researchers, scientific manpower, the density of the scientific community, R&D infrastructure, and the global integration of that economy to the global economy. Advanced manufacturing jobs are usually high-skilled jobs. On average, Sub-Saharan Africa exhibits a very high-skill employment share of just 6%, in contrast to the global average of 24%. And some of the most common types of high-skill employment on the continent are mainly what we call non-STEM related, science, technology, engineering, and management, and mathematics. There is therefore a need to tailor national educational systems in Nigeria and the rest of Africa to support industrial development. We must invest massively in STEM fields, in digital literacy, to boost the innovation capacity of our countries. Otherwise, we are going to miss the increasingly great opportunities in an innovative and increasingly global world. Industry contribution to GDP remains very low compared to Asian comparators. On average, industry generates just over $600 of GDP per capita. This is less than a third of what applies in Latin America. It's about 2,500. And it's barely 20% of that of East Asia, whose contribution GDP is about $3,400. Why does this matter? It matters because globally industrial GDP correlates closely with overall GDP. The faster the growth of GDP, the faster the growth of the income of those countries. It suggests also that industrial productivity spurs productivity and growth in other sectors. In Africa, as elsewhere, overall economic performance appears to be highly correlated with industrial value creation. Therefore, Africa's lack of industrial dynamism is reflected in its minimal share of the global value added through manufacturing, which lies just between 1.5 to 1.9% of the total global contribution over the last 10 years. In order to classify innovation capacity, I use the well-known Global Innovation Index. Africa lags far behind other regions. GII groups countries into 4 categories: either advanced, highly advanced, catching up, or lagging behind. What we find is that most African countries actually belong to those last category of countries. Not surprisingly, Nigeria ranks low on the Global Innovation Index at around 118th, compared with South Africa that ranks the highest on the continent at 58 worldwide. The country's lack of industrial manufacturing dynamism is also reflected in UNCTAD's 2021 Production Capacity Index. Nigeria ranks only 184 worldwide. Comparatively, Mauritius is number 46, South Africa number 74 on the continent. When you look at UNIDO's competitive industrial performance, again, Nigeria ranks 99 on that index. South Africa, 52nd in 2020. The CIP index gives us an idea of the capacity of innovation capacity of a country. It measures industrial capacity on 3 metrics: the capacity to produce and export manufactured goods, technological deepening and upgrading, and the ability of that country to make impact on a global scale. Nigeria's industry contribution to GDP is a mere $650. Its contribution is a mere 14.1%. So what is the future forward? What is next according to the title of today's paper? What is next for sustained innovation capacity in Africa? While Africa possesses huge amounts of minerals, including strategic minerals, mineral and oil-dependent countries wallow in poverty. According to the United States Geological Survey data on global mineral reserves, Africa hosts 52.4% of cobalt, bauxite that is used for aluminum production, 24.7%, graphite, 21.2%, manganese, 46%, vanadium, 16%. And data from the Africa Development Bank shows that current figures are actually just the tip of the iceberg, because current exploration activities in Africa are delineating huge strategic mineral deposits. However, industrial products from these minerals are assuming even greater importance as demand heightened during the transition to the low-carbon future, including cobalt, copper, lithium, magnesium, graphite, nickel, aluminum, steel, zinc, and rare earth elements. From the current near-tragic socio-economic conditions of countries like DRC and for much of the rest of Africa, it is clear that mineral dependence and reliance on raw materials has hardly been the best way forward for growth, and clearly has not been the basis for African development. Take, for example, DRC. It supplies 70% of the world's cobalt production. Another mineral, coltan, which is a combination of columbite and tantalite, is indispensable to the creation of all modern technological devices. This mineral, when refined in tantalum powder to create heat-resistant capacitors in electronic goods of mass consumption, laptops, cell phones, mobile phones, video games, consoles, whose profits have fueled the largest conflict in modern African history, including electric cars, Congo, holds 80% of the global coltan deposits, most of which is located in the Kivu and Oriental and produces 60% of the world's supply. The rise of digital technology and the innovation and revolution that we've seen during the last decade is driving the demand for coltan and will evidently persist as long as no alternative materials are found for these technological devices. The eastern part of the DRC is extremely rich in coltan, columbite tantalite. Unfortunately, it is not a place of riches, but a place rife with rivalries and conflict. So who benefits? Who benefits from Africa's mass assets? The countries with the technological capabilities, the countries with the industrial production capacity. They are the ones that reap the gains across all the value chains. The economic backwardness of Africa's mineral-dependent countries in the midst of metals and minerals and oil, for example, abundance, has therefore in large measure been due to the lack of critical scientific infrastructure and investment in human skills. You may ask, are natural resources therefore a curse, as some people have asked, or a blessing? History tells us that countries that made successful use of natural wealth by converting such assets for their citizens, they do so by constructing frameworks for sustainable macroeconomic policies, equitable governance system, and intolerance of corruption, among others. For example, countries such as the UAE, Norway, Malaysia, among others, have turned their natural resources into blessings due to obligatory focus on human resource development policies, expansion of physical and technological infrastructure. On the other hand, some other countries, including DRC, Nigeria, Angola, Guinea, Venezuela, Libya, among others, have witnessed their natural wealth turn into a resource curse due to lack of long-term vision of development, unequal distribution of income, leading to social unrest, violent conflict, bad governance, presence of high-level corruption, and lost opportunity for industrialization. These countries allowed an environment that fostered rent-seeking activities rather than creating institutional structures that could turn their natural resources into assets. Dependence on oil, dependence on minerals exports tend to exacerbate inequality in society and expand the army of the poor in our society. So what next as I conclude? Africa must wake up, and its leaders need to realize that easy money, short-termism from raw materials and oil exports leads more and more to the cul-de-sac of misery and poverty. However, acquisition of new technological changes pose significant challenges to economic structures such as we have in Africa that are very different from those of industrialized environments. These include poorly developed educational and knowledge infrastructure, an underdeveloped financial and skills market. Coordination and information externalities are the heart of this discussion, but they take on new and urgent notes in situations of underdevelopment such as we have. Industrial innovation policy should therefore be an urgent, immediate concern of our overall economic policy in Africa to address negative coordination and systemic externalities. Innovation policies, therefore, have to be part of the long-term strategy of development. I conclude by examining just 3 success factors very briefly, namely, the policies behind knowledge building and the evolution and impact of geographic clusters in the form of special economic zones. Markets, Africa should make sustained investment in knowledge building. Countries with a high innovation capacity, they make sustained investment in human capital. This is what I call the sum total of the skills level of a country's entire workforce, which includes managers, engineers, and administrators. It is strongly related to the potential real income per capita of any country and it is a function of the productivity of its labor. This East Asian experience demonstrates that human capital is extremely important as a source of economic growth. The source of competitive advantage in advanced technologies derive largely from superior education, training, and skills that are developed through learning by using, learning by doing, and doing so by innovation. These countries, unlike Africa's oil-dependent countries that are suffering from what I call revenue concentration, have diversified into export of manufactures through consistent and explicit technological learning in order to climb the industrial and technological ladder from low-tech to high-tech regimes. There are 4 measures of knowledge, and this doesn't exhaust everything, required for building long-term industrial innovation capabilities. The first is a sustained and explicit R&D investment by nations and the companies within those countries. Another is the overall quantum of S&T personnel broadly across the country. The third is the number of R&D personnel in industry. Private sector is extremely important. While the fourth is the number of research scientists and engineers across all spectrum of production, design, and R&D. The second factor is education, knowledge, and skills. Technological change induces demand for better educated and skilled workforce. Sectors that experience rapid technological progress, they tend to hire workers that are more educated because this group, they have far less need for training in basic skills and they constitute a ready innovation asset within the firms. There is a preponderance of evidence of a positive association between the rate of technological progress and the demand for an educated workforce. In addition to the induced skill effect, organizational changes also seem to underline the changing skill composition of firms. Introducing ICTs, for example, tend to change the way decisions are made within organizations by flattening the hierarchies, promoting greater involvement of the workers in management. Finally, the promotion of special economic zones. With the acceleration of globalization and increased competitive pressures, network clusters have emerged as an important form of economic organization to promote farm-level learning anchored on location advantage. Just like South Korea and Taiwan before it, China, for instance, recognized very early the need to foster industrial clusters in the form of special economic zones as a policy tool to attract flagship firms that are the center of global production networks. The emergence and growth of high-tech clusters often depend on 2 key factors, namely proximity to strong science and engineering university bases, and second, availability of well-developed infrastructure. Innovative clusters tend to form around sources of knowledge based on a sophisticated infrastructure in which knowledge is developed, shared, and exchanged. These clusters are highly concentrated and demonstrate strong linkages between entrepreneurs, investors, and researchers. They exist within localized geographic areas and interact with larger innovation systems at the regional, national, and international level. As I sum up now, industrial and innovation policies in the context of latecomer African countries should aim at fostering manufacturing, but more critical, address the great challenges of the SDGs number 1, 2, and 3, which is poverty, hunger, and diseases that determine the speed of development. Africa should tackle the challenges by investing explicitly in building technological innovation systems. The region should turn its challenges into opportunities, inherent in a knowledge-driven age to acquire industrial manufacturing capacity. In closing, when I enrolled in graduate studies at the Science Policy Research in 1985, my focus was on finding answers to purely technical solutions to Africa's rather slow industrial progress. I found that while well-designed industrial innovation policies are necessary, they are not sufficient for success, and rather, political actions, entrenched formal and informal institutions, bureaucratic competence far outweigh the technical. In my days at the United Nations University, later UNU Merit, as a professor, I identified intuitively with the system of innovation approach. I had hoped of finding a universal systemic approach, yet I realized that one needs to tailor the strategy to the level of development of each system and nation. According to Frederick List, who wrote a book called National System of Political Economy, he was very clear in his critique that real-world economies need to organize industrial policy framing within national context. Attaining to global leadership in critical sectors, as some Asian countries have done, takes time. It requires explicit and painstaking technological effort in design and, above all, in the competence of the state. According to List, countries that have progressed far ahead will prioritize their own welfare, and that theories that are made to suit universal purposes may not favor weaker nations. This is in part why developing nations need infant industry protection, for example. A universal theory needs clear specificities to address the needs of individual national economies. Adam Smith and other classical economists, for example, they took a cosmopolitan approach because they thought what was in the interest of England was also in the interest of the whole world as a whole. I quote, "What was relevant in the 17th and 18th century and in other countries may not necessarily be relevant for other times and for other countries, particularly for economically less advanced countries, at any time. This applies to us even now. Africa needs to industrialize and innovate its way out of poverty, hunger, and disease. While we might learn from broad principles, we must find the right practices for the 21st century and for each national conditions." I thank you.